if during World War II you would have gone door to door during Halloween to trick or treat, you potentially would have gone into quite a bit of trouble as a potential anti-American war saboteur. So nowadays, when we think about kids playing pranks on Halloween, you probably think about them doing stuff like ding dong ditch or perhaps throwing TP over a house or a tree. However, there was a darker side to Halloween, something that spread from the countryside to the big cities starting in the late 1800s. So back then, pranksters would go out and either open or completely steal the gates off of farms so often that this night became known as Gate Night all across rural America. This meant that the farmers would have to spend the next hours or potentially even days trying to recollect all of their escaped livestock. Besides taking or opening gates, there was also instances where pranksters put up farm tools or machinery or even farm animals on top of barn roofs for the farmer to have to figure out how to get it all down safely the next morning. So as these pranks made their way to the big cities slowly but steadily, these pranks evolved from being somewhat silly pranks to full-on crimes like arson and looting. And this reached a peak in the Great Depression era in the late 20s, early 30s. So local governments, newspapers, and police really pressed home the idea that if you go out and prank on Halloween during World War II, you are an unpatriotic American who is actively sabotaging the American war effort. Ringing on people's doorbells either for ding dong ditch or just for simply asking for candy, it might mean that that worker has to stay awake or gets woken up all the time, and this worker has to go to the factory the next morning and has to work on the Sherman or the B-17 or making bar machine guns. And if you're keeping him awake, he's not going to have the perfect output tomorrow. So that is sabotage. When cars became more common in cities, there was a lot of pranks that were involving cars around Halloween. Letting air out of the tires is one thing, but full on just slashing tires, faking accidents, or setting up fake detours, guess what? Sabotage. Wearing a mask as part of a costume might allow saboteurs to blend in sabotage. Damaging items or destroying them as part of the prank was also basically against the war effort because rationing and scarcity meant that these could just not as easily be replaced. Sabotage. So instead of these pranks, local schools, churches, or governments would try to set up events where kids and adults could go to try to keep their mind off of these pranks and just get them engaged in the Halloween festivities in a less prank-heavy way. Some of these events would actually see kids go door to door in their neighborhood to pre-assigned addresses, not waking up the workers, giving out candy in return for showing off their costumes. So Halloween had to be different. Besides having all these pranks that could potentially be very full of sabotage, though indirectly, there also was another thing, scarcity, mostly of sugar. Sugar is actually the first food item that gets rationed in the United States during World War II as early as April to May 1942, and it actually stays rationed as long as 1947 in some US states, where a lot of other items were taken off rationing in August to September of 1945. The reason why the US moved to ration sugar so soon and also so long has to do with a couple of different reasons. One of them is the loss of the Philippines to the Japanese pretty early in 1942, which was a large exporter of sugar. Furthermore, a ton of cargo vessels that were initially used for just exporting goods in general are now requisitioned or used in any sort of way to transport military goods, and sugar just is not high on the priority list when tanks, machine guns, oil, and everything else has to also be transported. And last but not least, in a 6-month period dubbed the Second Happy Time by German submarine captains, they destroyed in that 6-month period the equivalent of 25% of all the ships that were lost during World War II due to U-boat attacks. So in that 6-month period, they accounted for 25% of all the shipping that was lost. Right before World War II, the average American consumed about a pound of sugar a week, or the equivalent of this bag, about 4 pounds a month. However, with rationing beginning on sugar in 1942, that was cut to half of that, which meant that this bag would now have to go 2 months and not just 1 month. However, in 1945, they cut that in half again, where the average American could get a quarter pound of sugar a week, which meant that this bag went from being worth 1 month worth of sugar to 4 months worth of sugar, and again, this lasted in some places till 1947. So with sugar being rationed in the US, a ton of recipes started coming out in newspapers and magazines to help people still make goods at home that could taste sweet without the use of sugar, with some other replacement items that necessarily weren't on the rationing system, such as molasses, maple syrup, corn syrup, or honey. Furthermore, people also actually ended up using fruits such as apples and raisins to make pies feel more sweet, or to actually add them to frosting to give them a little bit of a sweet bite. Posters such as this Lifesavers one were used to help people understand that soldiers, airmen, marines, and sailors would have priority when it came to candies, and to expect some level of scarcity to sacrifice for the greater good. So when's the last time you TP'd a house or pulled some sort of prank on Halloween? Do you reckon you could survive off of just a quarter pound of sugar a week or a pound of sugar a month? Let us know down in the comments.